Millions of Iranians poured into the streets, claiming the vote had been manipulated. Some protesters even chanted slogans warning against the possibility that Mojtaba Khomeini might one day inherit power from his father. From what we see today, they were right. In their eyes at the time, the Islamic Republic was beginning to look dangerously like the monarchy it once overthrew. Now, in the aftermath of devastating strikes that have shaken Iran's leadership, Mojtaba Khomeini has stepped forward as the new supreme leader. His challenge is immense. Iran today faces severe economic strain. There is political divisions at home, and there is escalating confrontation with Israel and the United States. How will he cope? Many observers believe the foundation of the revolution itself would come under question. And so, we turn to a central question. What is it about the Ayatollah that defines Iran? In the case of Mojtaba Khomeini, is he the quiet strategist who has long influenced Iranian politics from the shadows? Is he the heir to a revolutionary system struggling to survive? Or is Mojtaba Khomeini the beginning of a new and controversial chapter in the history of the Islamic Republic? One thing is certain. He now leads a nation locked in a tense and dangerous confrontation with Israel and the United States. And according to Israel's defense minister, whoever succeeded Ali Khamenei would immediately become a target for elimination. We are watching. But to truly understand the new supreme leader, we must travel back in time. And why do we have to do that? Because this story did not begin today. It began with a revolution that overturned a monarchy, a revolution that transformed a nation. The revolution created the very political system that has now elevated Mojtaba Khomeini to power. That revolution is the Iranian Revolution of 1979. And without understanding that revolution, it is impossible to understand the structure of power in Iran today. Why does Iran have a supreme leader instead of a king? Why do religious scholars wield such enormous political authority? Why does the Iranian state define itself through resistance to Western influence? The answers lie in the events that unfolded more than 4 decades ago. Before the revolution, Iran was ruled by a monarch, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah. He was one of America's closest allies in the Middle East. His government pursued rapid modernization. His government worked towards strong ties with the West. His government launched ambitious economic reforms. But beneath that image of progress, deep tensions were building inside Iranian society. Political repression was widespread. Economic inequality was growing. Traditional religious institutions felt threatened, and many citizens believed that Iran's independence had been compromised by foreign influence. These pressures slowly accumulated over time. They erupted into a movement that brought millions of people into the streets. Workers, students, clerics came to the street. Merchants and intellectuals were not left out. Different groups with different grievances, but united by a single demand: the end of the Shah's rule. And at the center of that revolutionary movement stood a cleric who would change Iran forever. And that cleric is Ruhollah Khomeini. It was Khomeini who gave the revolution its ideological direction. And it was his vision that produced the Islamic Republic, whose leadership today has passed to Mojtaba Khomeini. So, if we want to understand the Iran of today, if we want to understand the authority of the supreme leader, and if we want to understand the forces shaping Iran's confrontation with the world, we must return to the beginning. We must ask the question that shaped modern Iran. What caused the Iranian Revolution of 1979? As you listen, you can provide answers to some of the questions by leaving your thoughts in the comment section. Remember, it is State Affairs, a class of history, politics, and power. In the case of Iran, one thing is clear. It is the clash of civilizations. The Shah tilted towards the West. In Iranian society before the revolution, Iranians looked like the West. They dressed like the West. Why some resisted that definition of Iran? Under the Shah, there was Islam, but the Shah looked at a Western model to define his economy and to define his political outlook. So if you look at that, you would see the perspective of the clerics who wanted a deep Islamic society. So it became a clash of Western ideals and a clash of theological ideals. And that is clash of civilizations. So this book by Samuel Huntington, The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of World Order, is most appropriate to read at this time in world history. Henry Kissinger describes this book as one of the most important books to have emerged since the end of the Cold War, the clash of civilizations and the remaking of world order. Here's the book. It's a good read. Reading is feeding the mind. In 1993, the esteemed journal Foreign Affairs published an article entitled The Clash of Civilizations by Harvard professor Samuel Huntington. According to the journal's editors, it went on to generate more discussion than anything they had published since the Second World War. In the article, Huntington posed the question whether conflict between civilizations would dominate the future of world politics. In this book, he gives the answer, showing not only how clashes between civilizations are the greatest threat to world peace, but also how an international order based on civilizations is the best safeguard against war. I want you to take note of that point in this book. The author, Professor Samuel Huntington, makes the point that international order based on civilizations is the best safeguard against war. Since America did not accept this conclusion by Samuel Huntington, America goes to war. And Iran is saying, our civilization is unique, and if you don't allow us to keep it, we will resist. So, since September 11, Samuel Huntington's thesis has seemed even more prescient and acute. The clash of civilizations and the remaking of world order is now recognized as a classic study of international relations in an increasingly uncertain world. The book to read is The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of World Order by Samuel P. Huntington. Here is the book. Remember, history is never dead. History is never truly past. What history does is to move with us. It breathes into the institutions we inherit, in the fears nations carry. You find history in the ambitions of leaders who believe they are shaping the future. But often, these leaders are only acting out the unfinished struggles of the past. So the story of Iran is one such struggle. It's a people wrestling with power, a civilization searching for dignity, a nation attempting to reconcile faith, modernity, independence, and authority. When we examine the revolution of 1979, we are studying an event in the Middle East, and we are also studying a permanent question of political life. Who should rule? And by what moral authority? This question arises because every society must eventually confront that question. And when the answer collapses, revolutions are born. Nigerians should understudy Iran. Let's look at the causes of the 1979 Iranian Revolution. In that revolution, a powerful monarch who had ruled Iran for decades was swept away by a popular uprising. In his place emerged an Islamic republic led by a religious scholar who had lived for years in exile. But revolutions do not simply happen overnight. You see, revolutions grow quietly. They gather anger. They accumulate grievances. And then suddenly, they explode. So today, as we raise questions, let's remember this one. What caused the Iranian Revolution? So, to answer this, we must travel back to the Iran of the 20th century. For much of the 20th century, Iran was ruled by a monarch known as the Shah. His full name was Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The Shah saw himself as a modernizer, a man destined to drag Iran into the modern world. He built roads, he expanded education, he strengthened the military. What did he do again? He aligned Iran closely with the United States and Western Europe. But modernization came with a price. Political freedom was almost non-existent. Opposition parties were suppressed under the rule of the Shah. Critics were jailed. And the Shah's secret police, known as Savak, became feared across Iran. Many Iranians began to feel that their country was modernizing without freedom. And modernization without freedom often creates resentment. Another major cause of the revolution lay in Iran's troubled relationship with the West. Many Iranians believed that their country had lost control of its destiny. This feeling was reinforced by a defining moment in Iranian history, the overthrow of Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953. We've treated this already. So if you were not part of that class, just scroll down. You will see how Mossadegh paid the price for trying to redefine Iran. Mossadegh had nationalized Iran's oil industry, challenging British control over Iranian resources. But his government was removed in a coup backed by Britain and the United States. After the coup, the Shah that had been toppled by the democratic process was returned to power with strong Western support. For many Iranians, this was deeply humiliating. They believed foreign powers had interfered in their democracy, and the Shah was seen by some as ruling with Western backing rather than popular legitimacy. In the 1960s, the Shah launched an ambitious reform program called the White Revolution. It included land reforms, expanded education, and greater rights for women. On paper, these reforms looked progressive, but they disrupted Iranian society in profound ways. Traditional landowners lost their power. Rural communities were uprooted. Millions of peasants moved into cities looking for work. Cities became crowded. Inequality widened, and many people began to feel left behind by rapid economic change. So while the Shah spoke the language of progress, many citizens experienced uncertainty and social dislocation. The anger of the religious establishment at this time began to rise. So, they became a powerful force emerging in opposition to the Shah. Many clerics believed that the Shah's policies were eroding Iran's Islamic identity. Take note, many clerics believed the Shah's policies were eroding Iran's Islamic identity. Islamic identity is key. That is why this book, The Clash of Civilizations, will explain the word. So what Iran saw was that Western culture was becoming more visible than Islamic culture. Traditional values were being challenged, and the authority of religious leaders seemed to be declining. Among the critics of the Shah was a fiery cleric named Ruhollah Khomeini. Khomeini condemned the Shah's rule. He accused the monarchy of corruption. He denounced Western influence in Iran, and he called for the establishment of a government guided by Islamic principles. Because of his criticism, Khomeini was forced into exile. But exile did not silence him. His speeches were recorded on cassette tapes and secretly distributed across Iran. Those tapes traveled far, from mosque to mosque, from market to market, from student circles to religious gatherings. Slowly, a revolutionary message spread. If you look at the economic boom of the 1970s and the crisis of that era, another picture emerges. During the 1970s, Iran became extremely wealthy because of oil. But wealth did not solve Iran's political problems. In fact, it made some tensions worse. Rapid economic growth created inflation. Living costs rose sharply. Corruption became more visible, and ordinary citizens began to ask uncomfortable questions. If Iran was so rich, why were so many people still struggling? Economic frustration mixed with political repression appeared, and that combination can be explosive for any country. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Iranian Revolution was the diversity of the opposition. It was not only religious leaders. Students joined the protests. Workers went on strike. Intellectuals criticized the regime. Merchants in the traditional bazaars supported demonstrations. Different groups had different motivations. Some wanted democracy, some wanted social justice, some wanted Islamic governance, but they were united by one goal: the removal of the Shah. By 1978, protests were spreading across the country. Demonstrations grew larger. Strikes paralyzed industries. Security forces struggled to contain the unrest. The Shah's authority began to crumble. Finally, in January 1979, the Shah left Iran. Within weeks, Ruhollah Khomeini returned from exile to a hero's welcome. The monarchy collapsed, and Iran was transformed into an Islamic republic. One thing that we know is that the revolution did more than change Iran. It transformed the politics of the Middle East. It challenged Western influence in the region. And the revolution demonstrated the powerful role religion could play in modern politics, continue to shape global politics. So, we have looked at what caused the revolution. There was no single cause. It was the result of many forces coming together. Political repression, foreign interference, economic inequality, cultural tensions. These are the causes of the revolution. Take note. The mobilizing power of religion, when explored, can change societies. So history teaches us something important here. When governments ignore public frustration, when economic change creates deep inequalities, and when political systems refuse to listen, societies begin to search for dramatic solutions. Sometimes, those solutions arrive in the form of revolution. And that is exactly what happened in Iran in 1979. As we can see, political power has a strange tendency. At some point, it stops listening. When rulers surround themselves with praise instead of truth, they begin to believe that stability is permanent. Take note, take note. When rulers surround themselves with praise instead of truth, they begin to believe that stability is permanent. But history shows something else. Empires collapse quietly before they collapse dramatically. They collapse first in the hearts of citizens. When ordinary people begin to feel that their voices do not matter, when the distance between the rulers and the rule becomes so wide, when dignity disappears from public life, the legitimacy of power begins to evaporate. And when legitimacy disappears, force alone cannot hold a nation together. The Shah of Iran discovered this truth too late. Many African leaders have not discovered it yet. It is a lesson that sounds across time. And it is a lesson that every nation must remember. "10 Lessons for a Post-Pandemic World" by Fareed Zakaria. 10 Lessons for a Post-Pandemic World by Fareed Zakaria. Look at this book. Scholars are writing. They are digging into the past, exploring events, exploring the character of leaders, defining today, and projecting into the future. Yet many are not reading them. In this book, 10 Lessons for a Post-Pandemic World by Fareed Zakaria, this global thinker foresees the nature of a post-pandemic world. In 10 surprising, hopeful lessons, Zakaria examines the political, social, economic, and technological consequences of COVID-19 in what will become an enduring reflection on life in the 21st century. This is a post-pandemic world. And in the post-pandemic world that Fareed envisaged, United States and Iran are bombarding, United States and Israel are bombarding Iran. Lesson 1 in this book is buckle up. Lesson 2, what matters is not the quantity of government, but the quality. And if you look at lesson 3, markets are not enough. You know, market is bubbling as we speak. Market is heating up. The volatile oil sector has heated up. The world foresees inflation, stagflation. Here comes another world economic crisis if we don't rise to the challenge of making peace around the world. Lesson 5 in Fareed Zakaria's book is Life is Digital. And lesson 7 is apt. Inequality will get worse. And if inequality gets worse, uprisings will spring up. In the process of suppressing uprisings, nations will go into civil wars. As we speak, the Middle East is in crisis. And if you read 10 lessons for a post-pandemic world by Fareed Zakaria, you would see that the word don't learn enough from history. He says in lesson 9 that the world is becoming bipolar. And he says in lesson 10, sometimes the greatest realists are the idealists. Interesting book. 10 lessons for a post-pandemic world. In the book, Zakaria addresses the deeper causes of the pandemic and how it will change the world and how it won't and how we would better get ready for the next one soon. I like the book, and it's one of the books I am reading. So what book are you reading? You can share the title and what the book is about so that we can look for it and read too. I tell you the books I read so that you can also find them and read them. The Shah of Iran discovered this truth too late. And what is the truth? When legitimacy disappears, force alone cannot hold a nation together. Now, to understand the deeper meaning of the revolution in Iran, we must also ask, what exactly is an Islamic revolution? Because the revolution of 1979 was not only about removing a king, it was about changing the very foundation of political authority. Most revolutions in modern history promise democracy. They also promise socialism or nationalism. But the Iranian Revolution promised something very different. The program is State Affairs.
On September the 11th, enemies of freedom committed an act of war against our country. Americans have known wars, but for the past 136 years, they have been wars on foreign soil, except for one Sunday in 1941. Americans have known the casualties of war, but not at the center of a great city on a peaceful morning. Americans have known surprise attacks, but never before on thousands.
Now, to understand the deeper meaning of that revolution, we must also understand the meaning of Islamic revolution. The revolution removed the king. The revolution also changed the very foundation of political authority. Most revolutions in modern history promise democracy, socialism, or nationalism. But the Iranian Revolution promised something different. It promised a return to divine authority in politics. It promised a return to divine authority in politics. In other words, the revolution declared that political legitimacy does not come from kings, and it does not come from elections alone, that it comes from God's law. That political legitimacy also comes from God's law. For many Iranians who joined the uprising, the revolution meant liberation from dictatorship and foreign domination. But for the clerical leadership, especially Ruhollah Khomeini, the revolution had a deeper meaning. It was meant to restore what they believed was the moral order of society. The argument was simple but powerful. If a society is governed only by human laws, then those laws can be corrupted by power, greed, or foreign influence, they said. They made the point clearly that if a society is governed by divine law, then justice becomes sacred. Do you agree? In that sense, the Islamic Revolution was political, and it was also about civilizing the people on the path of God. That revolution was a declaration that Islam should not remain confined to the mosque. It should also shape the state, the law, and the public life of society. What do you think? Let us know what you think in the comment section. Have you subscribed to the YouTube channel? Are you benefiting from the lessons? If you are benefiting from the lessons, subscribe to the channel. Invite your friends, your family to join the channel. If a society is governed by divine law, then justice becomes sacred. In that sense, the Islamic Revolution was political, and it was also about civilization. It was a declaration that Islam should not remain confined to the mosque, that Islam can shape society can shape the state, the law, and the public life of all. So this brings us to a crucial development in Iranian politics, the rise of the Ayatollah as a regulating force in the state. In Shia Islam, an Ayatollah is a high-ranking religious scholar, someone who has mastered Islamic jurisprudence. For centuries, these scholars guided believers in matters of faith, but they did not usually rule states. What Ruhollah Khomeini did was revolutionary, even within Islamic thought. He argued that in the absence of hidden imam, a messianic figure in Shia belief, that society needed guardians. Guardians who could protect Islamic law from corruption. And those guardians, he said, must be Islamic jurists. This idea became known as the Velayat al-Fag, which means the guardianship of the Islamic jurist. The concept states that a qualified Islamic scholar, a jurist trained in Islamic law, should oversee the affairs of the state until the return of the hidden imam. In practical terms, this meant something very radical. Political power would no longer belong to a king. It would belong to a religious authority. Under this system, the highest political authority became the supreme leader, a senior cleric whose responsibility was to ensure that the state remained faithful to Islamic principles. The Ayatollah therefore became more than a religious teacher. He became the guardian of the revolution. A revolution, to be effective, must be led. For Iran, it was led by Ayatollah Khomeini in 1979. What emerged in Iran after 1979 was a unique political system. It was neither a traditional monarchy nor a Western-style democracy. Instead, it became a hybrid system. Iran has a president, it has elections, it has a parliament, but above these institutions stands the supreme leader, the Ayatollah, who ultimately supervises the direction of the state. His authority extends over the military, the judiciary, and the ideological direction of the republic. In effect, the Ayatollah functions as the moral compass of the political system. So this is where the deeper meaning of the Islamic revolution appears. It was a revolution about power. It was also a revolution about regulation of society through moral authority. The Ayatollah was expected to act as a guardian of justice, preventing the state from drifting into tyranny, corruption, or foreign domination. Has Iran not drifted into tyranny? As an observer of global politics, has Iran not drifted into tyranny? Whether that system succeeded or failed is a matter. Whether that system succeeded or failed is a matter that historians and political thinkers continue to debate. I am observing the system. What will be the implication of the recent bombing by the United States and Iran? Will it redefine the theology system that governs Iran at the moment? The 1979 revolution created a model governance that the modern world had rarely seen before. A modern state governed under the supervision of a religious authority. It's like Rome. It's like Rome, governed by the Pope. Vatican City. But the difference is that Vatican City does not play state politics, because Vatican is not a state in the true sense of the word. So when the Shah fell in 1979, many believed they were witnessing the fall of a monarchy. But what truly emerged was something far more profound. A revolution that fused religion and political power. And at the center of that fusion stood the figure of the Ayatollah. Ayatollah, a cleric, and the ultimate guardian of the revolution. And that idea continues to shape the politics of Iran and the Middle East to this day. Take note. Most revolutions are not born from ideology. They are born from moral anger. A deep feeling among citizens that something fundamental has gone wrong leads to revolution. When citizens begin to feel that justice has been violated, that dignity has been denied, that power has become detached from responsibility, revolution is likely to occur. When the people's anger spreads across a society, when people who would normally disagree suddenly discover a common language, revolution is likely to occur. When students, workers, clerics, and intellectuals begin to complain intensely, and their complaints are not addressed, a revolution is likely to occur. Look, when revolutions occur, like the Iranian Revolution, they promise liberation, prosperity. They promise dignity, moral virtues. But they also create new forms of power. The revolution in Iran overthrew a monarchy, but it replaced it with another structure of authority, one rooted not in royal blood, but in religious legitimacy. When the uprising in Iran started in 1979, security forces gunned down many of the protesters. That has been happening under the reign of the Ayatollah. So is there any difference? The same poverty, the same suppression that led to the 1979 revolution has occurred and is occurring in modern Iranian society. So has the new system brought respite to the people? Has power truly changed in the interest of the common good? Or power just took a new form under the Ayatollah? Take note. History teaches us something uncomfortable. Removing a ruler does not automatically produce justice. True transformation requires something deeper. It requires a change in political culture, a culture where power is held accountable, a culture where power is held accountable, where truth is not feared, and where leadership understands that authority is not ownership of the state, it is stewardship. Now let's look at another dimension of the subject. The story of the Iranian Revolution does not end with the fall of the Shah. In many ways, that was only the beginning. What happened was that the revolution did something that shook the global order. It transformed Iran from one of America's closest allies in the Middle East into one of its most determined adversaries. And that transformation quickly evolved into a long geopolitical struggle between Iran and the United States of America. Before 1979, Iran under Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was a pillar of American strategy in the Middle East. The Shah bought billions of dollars in American weapons. He cooperated with Western intelligence agencies, and he acted as a regional partner in containing Soviet influence during the Cold War. In other words, Iran was part of the American security architecture in the region. But when the revolution occurred, the entire structure collapsed. The new revolutionary leadership under Ruhollah Khomeini saw the United States not as partner, but as the symbol of imperial domination. In revolutionary language, America became the great Satan. America became the great Satan. And how did Iranians reflect this in their actions? The confrontation between the two countries erupted dramatically in November 1979. A group of Iranian students stormed the American embassy in Tehran and seized dozens of diplomats. This event became known as the Iran hostage crisis. More than 50 Americans were held captive for 444 days, turning the crisis into a global spectacle and poisoning relations between the two countries for decades. For the student and many revolutionaries, the embassy symbolized decades of American interference in Iran. For the United States, the hostage-taking was a violation of international law and a direct challenge to American power. The result was immediate. Diplomatic relations between Iran and the United States collapsed, and they have never fully recovered since. It is also a revolution that became a geopolitical challenge for the world. Let's look at these books. They tell a story, and it's the story of understanding why the world is where it is at the moment. Another book you should read. It is entitled Corruptible: Who Gets Power and How It Changes Us. The Ayatollah got power, and how did the power change the Ayatollah? The Shah was removed. Why did power change the Shah? Corruptible: Who Gets Power and How It Changes Us, by Brian Klaas. A book you should read. Reading is feeding the mind. Feed your mind. In this brilliantly incisive and outrageously entertaining study, Professor Brian Klaas explains how the corruptible are drawn to positions of power, but we help put them there. Corruptible draws on groundbreaking interviews with some of the world's top leaders, from the noblest to the dirtiest, including presidents, criminals, court leaders, terrorists, psychopaths, and dictators. And he conducted these interviews to reveal the hidden reasons behind the rise and rule of bad leaders, weaving cutting-edge research with astonishing encounters. Corruptible explains the tyrants in our lives and how to get better people into power. Are you a Nigerian? This is the book you should be reading. Are you interested in power? Or you just complain and complain? Have you thought of getting power and using that power to transform society? What reading does is that, as you know, you get deeper into the issues of man. And that depth of the mind challenges one to be part of those who can transform societies. I hope you are one of them, that will redefine the land, redefine the world with political power. In that case, you should be reading Corruptible: Who Gets Power and How It Changes Us. So let's talk about a revolution that became a geopolitical challenge. Propagate this idea in the Middle East. This idea frightened many governments in the region, especially the conservative monarchies of the Persian Gulf. You have monarchs in UAE, monarchs in Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia. And Iran is coming to say, no, the monarchies cannot do it. Let's get leadership by the clerics. And this didn't go down well with the monarchies of the Persian Gulf. It also alarmed the United States. Because from America's perspective, the revolution threatened to destabilize a region that contained the largest oil reserves in the world. America has always thought of oil. And they go for it. They go for it. Throughout the 1980s and beyond, the rivalry between Iran and the United States began to take the form of indirect conflict, sometimes through sanctions, sometimes through diplomacy, and sometimes through proxy wars. The United States' support in 1979 as a domestic uprising inside Iran gradually became something larger. It became a strategic confrontation between two visions of world order. On one side stood the United States, a global superpower defending its influence in the Middle East. On the other stood revolutionary Iran, a state that defined its legitimacy through resistance to Western domination. They reshape alliances and they challenge global powers. And sometimes, revolution creates rivalries that last for generations. More than 4 decades later, the tension between Iran and the United States continues to shape the politics of the Middle East. And to understand that rivalry, we must always return to the revolutionary moment of 1979, because that was the year when the political earthquake in Iran began to shake the world. But in all this, what are the responsibility of citizens? So, there is a hidden lesson in this story of Iran. Nations are not shaped only by their leaders. Nations are also shaped by their citizens. Too often, we speak as though societies are victims of their rulers. But rulers do not govern empty lands. They govern people. And when citizens surrender their responsibility for the public life of their nation, power becomes concentrated in the hands of a few. Democracy dies not only through dictatorship, it also dies through public indifference. The health of any nation depends on citizens who ask questions, citizens who demand accountability. I'm talking about citizens who understand that freedom is not something given by rulers. It is something protected by the vigilance of society. So, as citizens, we must search for dignity if we want prosperity. The Iranian Revolution was also about dignity. A nation struggling to define its place in the world. A society attempting to reconcile foreign influence with cultural identity. A people seeking a form of power that reflects their values. But the search for dignity is never simple. Sometimes it produces enlightenment, sometimes it produces conflict. Sometimes it produces revolutions whose consequences unfold for generations. Sometimes it produces revolutions whose consequences unfold for generations. And that is why history matters. Because when we study the struggles of other nations, we are also studying ourselves. So I bring you this book, White Malice, the CIA and the neo-colonization of Africa. Remember, sometimes revolutions redefine society and produce conflicts. And that is why history matters. Because when we study the struggles of other nations, we are also studying ourselves. This book is history. When you study this book and the history it contains, you are also studying yourself, what the CIA did in Africa. And many of those actions led to wars in Africa, like we are seeing in the Middle East. So if there is one book you should have as an African, it is this book, White Malice by Susan Williams. White Malice, the CIA and the neo-colonization of Africa. I want you to read this book. Accra, 1958. Africa's liberation leaders have gathered for a conference full of strength, purpose, and vision. Newly independent Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah and Congo's Patrice Lumumba strike up a close partnership. Everything seems possible. But within a few years, both men will have been targeted by the CIA and their dream of true African autonomy undermined. It is the book to read. Susan Williams is a senior research fellow in the School of Advanced Study, the University of London. I'm talking about the author now. Her path-breaking books include Who Killed Hamajo, which in 2015 triggered a new ongoing UN investigation into the death of the UN Secretary General in 1961. She's also the author of Spies in the Congo, and that book spotlights the link between United States espionage in the Congo and the atomic bombs dropped on Japan in 1945. The book is a super read. White Malice, the CIA, and the neo-colonization of Africa. So we have seen how America and the Islamic Republic fell out. And today, the US and Israel are bombing Iran. Iran is fighting back. So what is it about Israel in this conflict? We also have to go back to history to understand it. So there is another dimension to the story of the Iranian Revolution that we must understand. The revolution did not only create tension between Iran and the United States, it also gave birth to one of the most enduring geopolitical rivalries in the Middle East, the struggle between Iran and Israel. And to understand this rivalry, we must begin with a surprising historical fact. Why surprising? Before 1979, Iran and Israel were not enemies. In fact, Iran and Israel were strategic partners. Under the rule of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Iran cooperated quietly with Israel in intelligence, trade, and military affairs. Both countries shared a strategic interest in countering Arab nationalism and Soviet influence in the region. Iran even supplied oil to Israel, and the two countries worked together on secret military projects. One of them was Project Flower, a joint missile development program between Tehran and Tel Aviv in the late 1970s. So the relationship between Iran and Israel was once pragmatic and cooperative, but the revolution changed everything. When Ruhollah Khomeini came to power, the ideological compass of Iran's foreign policy shifted dramatically. The new Islamic Republic declared that it would oppose Western domination and Zionism. In revolutionary rhetoric, the United States became the great Satan, and Israel became the small Satan. In revolutionary rhetoric, the United States became the great Satan, and Israel became the small Satan. Diplomatic relations were immediately severed. The Israeli embassy in Tehran was closed and handed over to representatives of the Palestinian movement. From that moment onward, opposition to Israel became a central pillar of Iran's revolutionary identity. Let's bring in the Palestinian question. Another factor linking Iran to the conflict with Israel is the past call a network of influence across the Middle East. Israel, on the other hand, sees these groups as direct security threats. And this has transformed the rivalry between Iran and Israel into a shadow war fought across multiple fronts. It is no longer a shadow war. It is no longer a prosy war. Israel is now at war with Iran, a full-scale war. In the past, we could say that the striking features of the Iran-Israel conflict is that the two countries rarely fought each other directly. What they did was to confront each other through prosy conflicts. Conflicts in Lebanon, in Syria, in Gaza. And they fought increasingly through cyber warfare, intelligence operations, and targeted strikes. That has changed. It's a full-scale war between Israel and Iran. Israel fears that Iran's nuclear ambitions could threaten its very existence. Iran believes Israel represents a strategic extension of Western power in the Middle East. Each side Each side sees the other not simply as a rival, but as a fundamental threat to its security and identity. But beneath the ideology lies issues we must reflect on. The Iran-Israel rivalry is also a struggle for regional influence. Iran seeks to expand its strategic reach across the Middle East. Israel seeks to prevent the emergence of any power that could surround it with hostile forces. And so, the two states compete across the strategic landscape of the region through alliances, through military innovation, through intelligence networks, and through influence over smaller states and armed groups, and now through war, direct confrontation. So what are the lessons for nations? Every nation stands permanently at the intersection of power and morality. Take note,